The void is never silent. Even when no engines burn and no vox traffic cuts across the black, there is the ever-present hum of something vast, something patient, something waiting. For the Imperium, that silence is dread, because silence is the herald of the Tyranid. Not a fleet, not a species, not an empire, but hunger given form. Imagine a world, its oceans alive with bioluminescent shoals, its continents striped with forests and cities, its skies crisscrossed by Now imagine that world in its final hours, the stars above rippling with a distortion like heat haze, as something ancient and alien drifts into orbit. The people look up, and they do not see ships, they see a mouth, and that mouth is opening. Before we descend into the abyss, a quick pause. If you find yourself drawn into this journey, if you want to see more tales of ruin, survival, and the endless wars of the far future, consider adding your voice to this channel. Like, share, and subscribe not just as numbers, but as oaths that the story continues. In a universe as bleak as Warhammer 40,000, every ally matters, even here, in the quiet between screams. Before the first spore ever carves a path through the void, before the first screech of chitin claws against ceramite, there is always silence, not the silence of peace, nor the silence of prayer. This silence is heavier, it is the kind that presses against lungs, that makes even the smallest motion seem like intrusion, as though the air itself already knows it is about to be stolen. It begins in the heavens, where Imperial augurs catch faint disturbances on OSPAC screens. Vox officers note strange distortions in the long-range transmissions, patterns that are at once meaningless and unsettling. A single word, scrawled on 1,000 reports that vanish into the bureaucratic avalanche of the Imperium. Anomalies. And yet, anomalies are the beginning of extinction. On the agri-worlds of the eastern fringe, farmers rose with the dawn under skies too wide to imagine danger. Their labor was slow, backbreaking, but steady. Each day they saw the same horizon of wheat fields swaying like oceans beneath pale suns, the same trade ships glinting as they traced paths through the void. Yet in those days before the fall, the skies began to change. Clouds lingered longer than they should have, colored wrong, tinged with bruised purples and deep sickly greens. The stars above flickered faintly, as though light itself had begun to drown. Cattle died in numbers too great to explain. Crops that had grown for generations withered overnight. And though the priests spoke of discipline and faith, though commanders barked about vigilance, the people whispered in fear. Something vast was coming. But the Imperium has a way of swallowing warnings. Governors consult their data slates and find numbers within acceptable deviation. Astropaths, blind and broken from years of service, struggle to project their voices across the void, only to find their visions clouded with a static roar. The administratum delays reports, adds seals of verification, routes them through layers of authority so tangled that by the time they are read, the meaning is dust. And so the silence deepens. Commanders tell their soldiers to hold fast, to trust the Emperor. Priests deliver sermons reminding the faithful that doubt is heresy. To question the silence is to betray vigilance. But in their hearts, in the thin hours of the night when sleep trembles, they feel the dread. It is in these hours that the hive fleet gathers. From afar, it does not look like a fleet at all. There are no clean lines of steel or banners of war. There is instead a vastness, an amorphous tide of chitin and flesh, drifting together in a swarm so massive that its scale is almost incomprehensible. Each organism is its own ship, yet none exists alone. There are kilometer-long beasts that serve as hive ships, their bodies layered with armored plates thicker than fortress walls, their maws opening to spew clouds of spores into the void. There are smaller escorts, krokans with vast trailing tentacles, serpentine shapes slithering through the currents of space. Every living vessel is part of a singular mind, linked through synapse creatures that pulse with psychic hunger. To gaze upon them through a pict feed is to see not vessels but the anatomy of a predator that spans the stars. Still, the people of the Imperium do not see this, they feel it. Children cry without reason, servitors malfunction, vox grills spitting out broken syllables like screams from dreams they cannot remember. Even the animals know their ears twitching, their movements panicked, their corpses piling high. The skies grow darker each evening, and the moons appear through haze as though submerged beneath unseen oceans. The dread becomes palpable, but the Imperium tells its citizens that nothing is wrong, and in that lie, entire populations are already doomed. When the first shadows fall, they do not arrive as armies. They come as distortions in the sky, streaks of black that look like ash smeared across the firmament. The air turns sour, rains fall wrong, heavy with stench, staining ground with hues that no natural weather could explain. Auspex officers report thousands of contacts, too many to catalogue, to diffuse, to target. At first, commanders dismiss it as debris fields. But debris does not move with intention. Debris does not blot out stars, and debris does not descend. On the ground, civilians watch the night sky dissolve. First one star disappears, then another, until whole constellations vanish behind roiling veils. The priests preach harder, their voices echoing across cathedrals crowded with fearful souls. They speak of trial, of the Emperor's test, of faith shining brightest in darkness. But even as they chant, the sound of impact trembles through the earth. Not explosions, something worse. Something alive striking ground, embedding itself into the very flesh of the planet. At first, it seems like rain. Then, like hail. Finally, like the sky itself is shattering. The spores are the first mouthful. They rain down in endless numbers, carried on winds warped by the psychic presence of the hive. Some burst upon impact, spilling pools of corrosive ichor that burn through stone and flesh alike. Others burrow into the soil, worming their way deep, unseen, until they sprout into forests of alien growths. From a distance, they resemble twisted trees, roots writhing like serpents, branches tipped with spore sacs that pulse like beating hearts. They spread across farmland, over cities, through rivers, choking everything with a cancerous fertility. Entire biomes begin to turn against their hosts. Forests rot from within, rivers boil with organisms not yet catalogued, and plains buckle into seething mats of biomass that stretch for kilometers. The world is no longer its own. For the Astra Militarum stationed there, it is chaos from the first hour. Soldiers who were trained to hold firing lines find themselves firing into clouds. Lasguns cut swathes through spores, only to watch them reform, multiply, drift onward. Artillery pounds the soil, only to stir up greater clouds of alien toxins. Commanders scream into vox links for air support, only to hear static, or worse screams carried from other regiments already overwhelmed. Tanks roll forward, tracks grinding over streets lined with refugees, only to vanish into fogs so thick the crews never emerge again. Yet worse than the fog, worse than the ichor, worse than the first claws breaking through windows, is the knowledge dawning upon them. This is not war. War can be fought. This is consumption. It is not conquest for territory, nor glory, nor vengeance. It is feeding. They are prey. On the outskirts of one city, a family huddles in a Hablock basement. They do not know the word tyr. They do not know hive fleets or synapse creatures. They only know the sounds above them, the screeches like tearing metal, the crash of collapsing masonry, the beating of wings too vast to belong to birds. The father holds his child and whispers that the Emperor protects, but the words sound hollow in his throat, lost beneath the thunder of claws raking the earth. When the walls shake, when the ceiling crumbles, when alien light floods in, their screams join the chorus of a billion others across the planet. Their story is not unique. It is universal. And still, the hive has not yet begun to feast in full. These first shadows are only the opening gesture. Spores and feeder organisms spread across continents, seeding nightmares that multiply by the hour. Mycetic spores burst open to release swarms of gaunts, small chitinous predators that scuttle in waves too vast to count, their talons flashing in the dim light. Larger beasts follow carnifexes thundering across plains, their armored hides deflecting volleys of lost hive tyrants, striding like avatars of destruction, psychic commands rippling from them into the endless swarm. And above it all, in orbit, the hive ships wait. Their tendrils pierce atmosphere, reaching down like roots into the world, patient, inevitable. The planet itself begins to feel as though it is sinking, not into destruction, but into digestion. Into capital, where planetary governors and generals argue over data slates that already mean nothing. The silence breaks at last. A chorus of psychic voices erupts across the minds of every psycho on the world. Some drop dead instantly, their brains boiling inside their skulls. Others scream, thrashing until their bonds break, until guards shoot them to end their madness. Those few who survive babble of an endless hunger, a will so vast it drowns every thought. They describe oceans of teeth, skies that breathe, and a voice that does not speak but consumes. Their warnings, too, are swallowed in the panic. Lost as the halls of command collapse beneath swarms of alien flesh, it is said that in the last hours before the first shadow becomes the full eclipse, the Emperor hears every prayer. Perhaps it is true, perhaps not. But as the skies blacken with spores, as oceans churn with alien tides, as cities crumble beneath the weight of a hunger that knows no end, One truth is certain, a world is already dead long before its surface is stripped. The silence is not the absence of sound, it is the last breath a planet takes before the feast begins. And the hive fleet has only just opened its mouth. When the skies finally break, they do not do so with subtlety. The warning signs that preceded the flickering constellations, the poisoned rains, the static-choked vox were merely the overture. Now comes the symphony of annihilation. It begins not with the roar of thunder but with a sound more alien, a vibration that resonates in the bones before it reaches the ears. The atmosphere itself groans, torn apart by pressure waves as the first true descent begins. Where once there were clouds, now the heavens boil with fire and shadow. Entire horizons are swallowed by storms of falling shapes. They streak downward, glowing red against the friction of entry. 1,000 burning meteors trailing tails of smoke across the blackened sky. To the untrained eye, it might look like the world is being bombarded by asteroids. To the Imperium's soldiers, hardened by a dozen campaigns, it looks like the end. Civilians spill into streets already clogged with refugees, pointing upward in horror as the shapes grow larger. The first impacts shake the ground with a violence no natural quake could match. Hab blocks split open like cracked bones, manufactorums groan as their girders buckle, cathedrals shudder and collapse beneath their spires. Where the meteors fall, they burst not into fire but into life. Vast mycetic spores split open with the wet sound of rending flesh, disgorging torrents of creatures onto the already fractured world. Gaunts pour out in rivers of chitin and claw, their shrieks drowning out the screams of those who still live. They do not advance in ordered lines. They swarm a living tide, surging over rubble, over bodies, over anything that dares to exist in their path. For the Astra Militarum, the orders are the same as they have always been. Lines are drawn across boulevards, tank regiments grind their engines into life, and artillery crews shout range coordinates over the thunder of falling spores. Basilisks bark into the smoke, their shells bursting in distant craters where claws are already rising. Lemon rust battle tanks rumble into intersections, their turrets swiveling to unleash barrages that tear waves through the first waves of creatures. The ground shakes with each detonation, but the swarm does not break. For every gaunt that falls, 3 more scuttle forward, clambering over corpses, heedless of survival. The soldiers fire until their barrels glow red, until their vox links crackle with screams from comrades already overrun. But still the horde presses closer. Above, the sky itself changes. The mycetic spores are not the only things falling. Winged creatures ride the storms, vast gargoyles with membranous wings that beat in unison, blotting out the light as they swoop over battle. Their shrieks pierce the din of battle, and their living projectiles rain down with acidic force, melting through armor, searing flesh. Valkyrie gunships rise to meet them, autocannons blazing, missile racks thundering, but for every formation that cuts a path through the gargoyle clouds, to more vanish beneath swarms that latch onto their hulls and tear them apart midair. Wreckage rains down across the city, fireballs consuming streets already choked with fleeing souls. The atmosphere becomes a war in itself. The heavens aflame with death, and then come the larger beasts. At first, they are shapes on the horizon, hulking silhouettes moving with terrible inevitability. But as they approach, their scale becomes nightmarishly clear. Carnifexes charge through the ruins like living siege engines, their armored shells deflecting even crack missiles, their claws tearing through tanks as though they were paper. Screamer killers, a variant of Carnifex, let loose psychic roars that shatter glass, rupture eardrums, and send whole platoons fleeing in blind panic. Biovores lumber into the fray, their bloated forms launching spore mines that arc overhead before exploding into showers of corrosive ichor, reducing squads into piles of steaming ruin. The defenders do not fight for victory. They fight for hours, for minutes, for seconds. Commissars stride along the lines, bolt pistols raised, executing soldiers who falter, screaming litanies of the Emperor into the storm. Stand firm, they cry. Stand and die in his name. And die they do. Lasguns firing until their charge packs burn out. Bayonets slashing in desperate hand-to-hand combat as the gaunts crash against them like waves against rocks. For a moment, it seems as though the line might hold, but then the hive tyrants arrive. They descend not as beasts, but as generals of the swarm, towering monsters whose wings beat gales across the battlefield, whose talons drip with ichor, whose minds radiate command. Where they stride, the lesser creatures surge with greater purpose, their attacks more coordinated, their movements more precise. Entire regiments buckle beneath the weight of that psychic control. Tank crews suddenly find themselves flanked on all sides. overwhelmed by predators who strike with unnatural precision. Artillery batteries that once fired without pause now fall silent, their crews torn apart by coordinated assaults that strike with unerring timing. The swarm is no longer chaos. It is strategy. On one world, in a city whose name will be forgotten, the capital square becomes a last stand. The governor himself is dragged from his palace and forced into the trenches with the soldiers he once commanded from afar. Priests raise the imperial aquila high above the barricades, their voices ragged but unbroken as they chant the emperor's creed. The square becomes a fortress, its avenues blocked by wrecked tanks and shattered manufacturer machinery. For hours they hold, lost-fire cutting down endless gaunts, missiles streaking into the skies to bring down gargoyles, bayonets plunging into alien flesh again and again. Each moment feels stolen, bought with the blood of comrades who will not see another dawn. But as the hours stretch into night, the sky grows stranger still. The stars do not merely vanish, they are consumed. Above the blackened clouds, the hive ships move into position. Vast tendrils extend downward, breaching the atmosphere, glowing faintly as they begin to pierce the planet itself. The very air seems to warp, the winds shifting into unnatural currents that pull smoke and flame upward, as though the sky itself is drinking the world below. Those who live to see it do not have words to describe the sight. It is as though the heavens have become a maw, and the planet is already halfway swallowed. In the trenches, morale collapses. Soldiers watch as their bullets vanish into alien flesh, as their grenades scatter but barely slow the swarm. They see commissars fall, dragged screaming into the darkness. They see priests torn apart mid-sermon, their aquillas shattered beneath talent. Some fight harder, consumed by desperation. Others break, throwing down their weapons, only to be trampled by both comrades and aliens alike. The governor dies in the mud, not by alien claw, but by a stray lost bolt in the chaos. His body trampled and forgotten before the swarm claims it. And still, the battle is not yet finished. In orbit, Imperial Navy vessels arrive, their guns blazing, their lance batteries scything through the void. For a moment, hope flickers. Plasma cannons roar, torpedoes streak into the heavens. Hive ships erupt in bursts of ichor and flame. The defenders on the ground cheer, their voices roar, their arms raised in desperate triumph. But the cheer dies as quickly as it begins. For every hive ship destroyed, 10 more loom behind it. The swarm is endless. The navy begins to falter, their losses mounting as tendrils pierce their hulls, as swarms of living torpedoes batter their formations. Vox channels fill with screams and static, and then the Imperial vessels vanish, retreating into the warp to carry word of the fall. The defenders below are abandoned. By dawn, the capital is gone. Streets once paved with stone are rivers of ichor, buildings reduced to nests of alien growth, cathedrals consumed by pulsating biomass. The few survivors who stumble through the ruins do not flee, they wander, broken, until the swarm finds them. Their deaths are not swift. The gaunts toy with them, dragging them into shadows where claws do their work unseen. Some are captured alive, fed into digestion pools that bubble across the city, their bodies stripped of flesh, their bones spat out as waste. By the end of the day, the city is no more, and yet this is not the end. This is the pattern, repeated across continents, across oceans, across every stronghold that once dotted the planet. Each city falls, each fortress crumbles, each regiment dies in place. There are no retreats, no reinforcements, no salvation. Only the slow, grinding realization that the sky has fallen, and it will never rise again. The last transmissions captured by orbiting servitors before their destruction speak of silence, returning once more. Not the silence of peace, not the silence of victory, but the silence of absence. The skies are empty of stars, the Vox is empty of voices, and the world is empty of life. The Imperium will one day mark this planet as lost, its name struck from records, its memory swallowed by bureaucracy. To the Hive Fleet, it is simply one meal among countless others. But for those who once looked up at the stars and prayed, for those who once raised the aquila in trembling hands, for those who once believed the sky was their shelter, this silence is the true end. The sky fell, and with it, everything that lived beneath it. When a world falls silent beneath the tread of the swarm, when its skies are stripped bare and its cities lie ruined, that is not the end of the Tyranids' hunger, it is only the beginning. The invasion, the slaughter, the destruction, all of that is but prelude, for the true harvest begins only once the last cries have died, once resistance has been ground into nothing. Then the hive mind turns its full attention to the corpse it has claimed, and the feasting begins. It starts with the ground. Digestion pools bloom across battlefields like cancerous wounds. their surfaces bubbling with a sickly, phosphorescent glow. They are not built, they are grown, extruded from the very bodies of bioforms that collapse and liquefy into sludge. The stench is unbearable, a combination of burnt flesh, ammonia, and rot. Into these pools, the swarm drags everything it has: claimed bodies, buildings, weapons, vehicles, entire monuments of stone and steel. Gaunts and larger beasts alike labor without pause, reducing wreckage into manageable chunks, herding captives alive into the muck to dissolve screaming beneath the surface. Nothing is spared. The pools bubble and writhe as flesh. Metal and stone are broken down into base, organic slurry, ready to be sucked skyward through the tendrils of the hive fleet. The sight is one of obscene efficiency. Basilisk guns, once proud in their defiance, now lie at the bottom of these pools, their adamantium frames dissolving slowly, their sacred aquillas melting away beneath chemical tides. Manufactorum walls collapse into heaps that are stripped clean of metal and plasticrete before sinking beneath the frothing surface. Even the corpses of tanks and aircraft, thought to be useless scrap, are dragged in, their crew still trapped within. And when the slurry grows thick with residue, feeder organisms arrive. They descend from the sky like jellyfish, their translucent bodies glistening with slime, their tendrils plunging into the pools to siphon up the liquefied remains. They pulse with grotesque light as they draw sustenance upward, carrying it back to the orbiting hive ships. Above, the sky has changed. Where once hive ships loomed in distant orbit, now they descend lower, close enough that their shadows smother entire continents. Their tendrils lance downward, piercing oceans and mountains alike. These are no mere appendages. They are vast bioconduits, siphons through which the entire biomass of a world is consumed. Oceans churn into whirlpools as their waters are sucked upward, carrying shoals of dead fish and drowned corpses into the void. Forests collapse as their roots are ripped free and their trunks liquefied into nutrient pulp. Even the atmosphere is not spared. The ships breathe in clouds, strip the oxygen, and leave behind air that tastes of ash and acid. The harvest is not swift. It is patient, inexorable, a process honed across countless worlds. What once took eons of natural decay, the swarm accomplishes in days. The great cathedrals of the ecclesiarchy, which once stood as eternal monuments to faith, are toppled, their sacred icons melting into slurry, indistinguishable from the bones of the fallen faithful. Hablocks where generations lived are sucked into the same pools as the manufactorums that employed them, their histories erased in the same instant. The Tyranids do not distinguish between sacred and profane, between holy relic and worthless scrap. To them, all is fuel. The Imperium's records, when they eventually reach segmentum command, will describe the process clinically: biosphere stripped, planetary mass reduced, life expunged. But for those who lived through Itor, those rare few who were taken alive and smuggled aboard outbound refugee crafter, memory is far worse. They speak of the smell, the thick reek of rot that covered every horizon. They speak of the sound, the endless churning of pools, the grinding of titanic tendrils as they tore through mountains. They speak of the silence too, for once the swarm had claimed a world. No birds sang, no winds rustled leaves, no machines hummed, only the endless, patient feeding. In the oceans, the process is even more grotesque. Entire seas are boiled away, their waters thickening into broth as feeder beasts churn the depths. Leviathans rise from the abyssal plains, gargantuan bioforms bred to consume aquatic life. They devour whales, crocodils, and all manner of xenobeasts that once roamed the deep. Their stomachs swell grotesquely before splitting, disgorging slurry into surface pools for siphoning. Coastal cities vanish beneath tidal waves, not of water but of liquefying biomass, washing away survivors who had hidden in sea, only to be dissolved alongside the fish they once caught for food. Forests suffer no less. Spore chimneys sprout from the earth, vast fungal towers whose vents spew clouds of digestive spores. They drift across plains and hills, reducing forests into mulch in hours. Leaves blacken and crumble, bark peels away, and roots liquefy into streams of ooze that seep downhill into the waiting pools. Herds of once proud megafauna stampede in panic, their roars drowned beneath the hiss of spores. They collapse mid-run, twitching as their lungs dissolve, their bodies already beginning to melt before they strike the ground. What once was wilderness becomes a flat plain of sludge, its surface broken only by the looming silhouettes of feta creatures. On the human scale, the horror is more intimate. Survivors, those few who had evaded the initial slaughter, are hunted not for death but for biomass. Lictors stalk the ruins, dragging captives screaming into the shadows. Ripper swarms flood basements and tunnels, sniffing out those who thought to hide underground. Some are eaten immediately, torn apart in a frenzy of teeth and claw. Others are dragged alive into pools. Their struggles are futile thrashing as the slime closes over their heads. Families vanish together, clutching each other as they sink, their bones rising hours later to float on the surface like driftwood. Yet even in this harvest, there is something colder than the act of consumption itself. It is the sense of finality. Once the process begins, there is no reversal, no salvation, no chance of reclamation. The Imperium, for all its power, cannot undo a devoured world. Planets consumed by Tyranids are not merely dead, they are unmade. What remains afterward is not a ruin that can be rebuilt, not a wasteland that can be It is a husk, a barren sphere stripped to the crust, left airless, waterless, lifeless. To stand upon such a husk is to stand on the corpse of a world. A silence so profound that even echo refuses to linger. The psychers who survive speak of it in stranger terms. To them, the feeding is not merely material but psychic. They describe the hive mind's presence as a constant thrum, a vast chorus that grows louder with every ton of biomass consumed. They feel the planet's very soul being drained, its psychic resonance collapsing into nothing. To them, the world does not merely die, it is erased from the immaterium, its presence smothered like a candle beneath a sea. Some go mad in the telling, their eyes hollow, their words breaking into screams as they relive the sensation of being devoured alive, not in body but in spirit. One report, smuggled through by a rogue trader before the quarantine net tightened, speaks of standing on a mountain ridge and watching an entire valley vanish in the space of a day. From dawn to dusk, the trees melted, the rivers boiled, the towns were stripped to their foundations, and by nightfall, the valley was a flat plain of slime, drained upward by a vast tendril that throbbed with stolen life. It was as though the Emperor himself had turned his face away, the trader wrote, and left us to the maw of something that does not recognize prayer, or honor, or mercy. The harvest is endless, tireless, and without remorse. Days blur into weeks, weeks into months. The hive fleet does not rush, for it cannot be starved. It feeds at its own pace, stretching out its tendrils like a spider over prey, draining every drop of value before moving on. And as it does, it grows. The ships swell with nutrients, birthing new generations of bioforms, spitting them out into the void to join the Great Migration. A world consumed becomes a womb for the next conquest. There are whispers, too, of the psychic echo that lingers afterward. Some inquisitors claim that husk worlds can never be settled again, not because of lack of resources, but because of the shadow left behind. Psychers who walk their barren plains scream of hunger gnawing at their souls, of whispers that are not words but appetite, of eyes that watch from every shadow. The Tyranids move on, but they leave behind scars that may never fade. And so the harvest concludes, as it always does. When the last drop is drained, when the last mountain is stripped bare, when the last ocean is siphoned dry, the hive fleet withdraws. Its tendrils retract, its feder creatures collapse into lifeless husks, its pools dry into crusted scars. The skies clear, but there is no life beneath them, only stone, dust, and silence. From orbit, the world is a cracked ball, its surface scoured clean, its colors muted to gray and ash. From the void, it looks less like a planet and more like a bone picked clean of marrow. The Imperium calls it exterminatus by other means. But there is no defiance in this death, no dignity, no choice, only consumption. For the Tyranids do not merely kill, they erase, they feed, and in feeding, they prepare for the next feast. Thus the harvest begins, and thus it always ends with nothing. The aftermath of a Tyranid harvest is not measured in ruins, because ruins suggest something remains. The silence they leave behind is a silence deeper than abandonment, heavier than mere desolation. It is the silence of erasure. Where other wars scar, the Tyranids strip. Where fire leaves ash, they leave nothing but dust. To walk upon a world that has been fed upon by the swarm is to stand on the edge of absence, a place where existence itself feels thin, where even memory seems to hesitate. From orbit, these husk worlds resemble cracked marbles, their oceans gone, their greens and blues replaced by grays, ochres and sickly beige. The atmosphere is thin, clinging in patches like a tattered shroud. From a distance, one might mistake such a world for a barren rock that has never known life. Only those who knew it before can grasp the depth of what has been taken. A place once vibrant with people, cities, forests, and oceans is now indistinguishable from the lifeless moons that drift around gas giants. But the truth is worse than lifelessness. These worlds are not simply dead, they have been hollowed, emptied in ways that feel deliberate, as though the universe itself recoils from what occurred there. Imperial surveyors who return, years after a harvest rite of haunting unease. The Auspex readings are flat, the Vox channels eerily clear, their boots crunch on dust that was once fertile soil, and every step echoes as though the planet itself is cavernous. They report no birdsong, no insect drone, no whisper of breeze through trees, because there are no trees. There are no forests, no oceans, no clouds. Even the rains are gone, boiled away by siphons that drank them to the last drop. If they linger too long, many describe hearing faint sounds, the scrape of movement, the sigh of voices, the whisper of water dripping in caverns that no longer exist. They are hallucinations, the echoes of a memory the planet itself once had of being alive. Cities fare no better. To call them ruins is generous, for the Tyranids do not leave ruins, they consume them. Hablocks are melted into slag, their ferrocrete walls stripped down into slurry and lifted into the belly of the swarm. Manufactorums are gutted, their towering stacks reduced to corroded stumps. Cathedrals of the ecclesiarchy vanish into the pools with the same cold indifference as markets and tenements. When the swarm withdraws, it leaves no skeletons of buildings, no monuments standing amid the waste. It leaves blankness, streets scraped clean, foundations dissolved, plazas reduced to featureless plains of dust. A city that once held millions becomes a flat expanse with no trace of habitation, as though the very idea of human life has been wiped from the stone. There are testimonies from survivors of Huskworld landings, refugees brought unwillingly to such places by unscrupulous rogue traders seeking salvage. They describe stepping into old cities and being unable to find even a single relic. Not a door hinge, not a pipe, not a fragment of glass. It is not looted, it is gone, melted, digested, recycled into the swarm, where exterminatus by fire leaves shadows of bodies burned into walls. The Tyranids leave nothing but smooth stone. No trace of defiance, no trace of prayer, no trace at all. And it is not just material that vanishes. Worlds that have been devoured are said to lose their presence in the war. Imperial navigators report that such husk worlds shine less brightly in the Astronomican's light, as though their psychic resonance has been muted. Psychers speak of emptiness, of reaching out with their minds and finding nothing where once there was the noise of countless lives. It is as though the swarm has stolen not only biomass but soul, draining the very echo of existence. There are whispers among the Ordo Xenos that this may be the most terrible crime of all. For a world without warp presence is a wound in the fabric of reality itself, a scar that never heals. The silence has psychological weight. Inquisitors who visit Huskworlds often restrict their retinues from staying more than a day. Reports note that after 24 hours, men and women begin to speak less, their words trailing into whispers. Laughter disappears entirely, as if sound itself has become sacrilege. Some describe a sensation of being watched, not by eyes but by hunger and absence so vast it feels like a predator. In longer exposures, crewmen are known to wander off into the wastes, following hallucinated voices, never to return. Even Astartes have reported unease. One account from a librarian of the Ultramarines describes standing on the remains of a hive city and hearing a psychic echo of chewing, a sound that did not exist in air but in memory. He left the planet within the hour. The Adeptus Mechanicus sometimes sends expeditions to Husk worlds searching for buried archaeotech that may have escaped consumption. Most of these missions vanish. The few that return bring back almost nothing of value, save for datalogs of unsettling detail, cogitators that record blank screens where once there were layers of vox recorders that pick up faint, rhythmic thumps in the dust, as though heartbeats of a world too vast to die still linger faintly in its crust. Skittery who wander too far into plains of ash sometimes return with empty expressions, their newspheric chatter describing sensations of hunger so overwhelming they disable their cum feeds out of madness. The silence is not just the absence of sound, it is the absence of consequence. On a husk world you can scream into the sky, fire your laskin until the power pack bleeds dry, drop a cathedral bell from a ruined spire, and nothing answers. No echo, no response. The sound vanishes into emptiness. For some, this is worse than the violence of the harvest itself. To fight and die against Tyranids is to be remembered, at least in the screams of battle. To live after they are gone is to dwell in a graveyard so absolute that even grief feels muted. And still, the Imperium returns. It always returns. There are colonization attempts, despite warnings. A world is a world, after all, and in an Imperium stretched to breaking, even a husk has value. Settlers land, carrying their faith, their machines, their hope. They till the dust, they build new hablocks, they raise shrines, and for a time, life stirs, but it never lasts. The soil yields nothing but stunted crops. Wells run dry within years, and always the settlers speak of the silence. They whisper of dreams where the ground beneath them churns, where pools bubble with unseen shapes, where voices cry out from beneath the dust. Children wake screaming of mouths in the sky. Priests preach, but their sermons ring hollow against the emptiness, and their congregations dwindle. Within decades, the settlements fail. Sometimes famine claims them, sometimes madness, sometimes the settlers vanish altogether, leaving empty streets behind. It is said that the Eldar, who know the Tyranids better than most, refuse even to step foot upon Husk. Their farseers describe such places as cursed scars, claiming that to remain too long is to draw the attention of the great devourer itself. Whether this is superstition or psychic truth, the Imperium does not know, but it listens. For even the Ordo Xenos, whose duty it is to study the swarm, grows cautious. They catalogue from orbit, but they are slow to land, and slower still to remain. Among Imperial scholars, there are debates. Some argue that the silence is merely natural consequence, that biomass is gone, atmosphere thinned, and nothing remains to carry sound or life. Others argue darker theories, that the hive mind leaves behind not just empty planets, but psychic traps, that husk worlds are resonant beacons, their silence a lure that calls to future fleets, that to settle them is to paint a target upon oneself, ensuring the swarm's return. There are no confirmed cases of this yet, but the fear lingers, and in the Imperium, fear is as potent as proof. The silence of worlds eaten by Tyranids is not just absence, it is a statement. It is the hive mind's signature, scrawled across the void and planets erased from maps. It is a message, though not in words. We were here, and we will be here again. And when explorers or refugees or soldiers stand upon such soil, they understand the message with terrible clarity. The silence is not peace. The silence is warning. The silence is hunger, waiting to return. There are terrors in the galaxy that can be fought with steel and fire, horrors that can be met on the battlefield with bolter, blade, or lass. But the Tyranids bring a weapon more insidious than their claws. A weapon that cannot be blocked by ceramite plate or fortress wall. It is the suffocating pall known as the shadow in the warp. The unseen veil that descends upon a world before the swarm arrives, smothering thought, silencing prayer, and severing the fragile cord that binds humanity to its only light in the darkness. Imperial histories describe this phenomenon with technical precision. Astropaths fall silent, their souls muffled as though their voices are swallowed by a void. Navigators report the Astronomicon dimming, not gone, but distorted, as though a veil of static stretches across the stars. Voxcasters that once thrummed with chatter fall dead, save for bursts of warped noise and broken echoes. Yet these dry accounts do little justice to what it feels like to live beneath that shadow. To those upon the ground, the change comes like a storm on the horizon, slow at first, then all at once, until every breath feels heavier, every thought is harder to hold, and even hope itself seems to wither in the air. Priests of the Millennium, who stand upon pulpits to rally the faithful, describe their sermons faltering in their throats, words that once soared ring hollow. The divine fire that should ignite their hearts sputters like a candle in a gale. Psychers fare worse. Many collapse outright, their minds crushed beneath the pressure, bleeding from their eyes and ears as though their skulls are overfilled vessels. Those who survive mutter nonsense, whispering of vast oceans pressing down upon them, of being drowned in thought not their own. They describe it not as silence, but as the roar of countless voices, all speaking in hunger, all speaking in unison, and all speaking directly into the marrow of their being. For soldiers of the Millennium, the shadow manifests as a slow erosion of discipline. Veterans who have fought under bombardment, who have stared into the eyes of orcs or necrons, find their hands trembling when the shadow arrives. Their orders seem less certain, their leaders less convincing, their faith less enduring. The bond between comrade and comrade frays, not by disobedience but by despair. Men stop singing in the trenches. Officers deliver commands, but their words sink like stones into water. Even the roar of engines sounds muted, as though the world itself conspires to hush them. It is a terror more complete than bombardment, because there is nothing to strike back at, nothing to kill to end the fear. The Astartes, genetically sculpted to resist fear, are not immune. Librarians, those attuned to the warp, feel the shadow most acutely. They speak of psychic suffocation, of reaching for the familiar currents of the immaterium and finding only a wall of iron. In that wall they sense not indifference, but intent the hive mind. vast and infinite, pressing down like the weight of a galaxy. To gaze into the warp under the shadow is to gaze into an abyss that gazes back with hunger. For some chapters, this is their first true taste of helplessness, and they respond with rage, striking harder, faster, desperate to reclaim their agency from an enemy they cannot touch. But even their fury does not lift the paw. There are testimonies preserved in the archives of the Ordo Xenos, whispered accounts collected at terrible cost. One comes from the survivors of Tyranids' fall, a handful of soldiers who lived through the first true contact with the Great Devourer. They describe the shadow's descent as a nightfall at midday. The sun still shone, but all warmth was gone. The world itself felt dead, not because of claws or fangs, but because every soul upon it was smothered in the same dread. The men described feeling abandoned by the Emperor, not in theology, but in sensation, as though his light no longer reached them. In the vacuum of that comfort, their courage collapsed, and when the swarm descended, they barely raised their rifles on Cadia in later centuries, where fortresses stood unyielding against the servants of chaos. Veterans whispered of the shadow being worse than demonic incursion. Demons scream, rage, and tear, but their presence affirms life, even if twisted. The Tyranid shadow is a negation. It affirms nothing. It speaks not of sin or punishment, not of rebellion or glory. It only smothers, it only erases, and in that erasure, the human soul falters. Because to live without connection, without faith, without light is to live already dead. For the Mechanicus, the phenomena is catalogued with clinical fascination. Magot's biologies record data streams of vox signals that distort into maddening harmonics. Machine spirits grow sluggish, servitors stall, cogitators produce gibberish. Some within the cult Mechanicus argue that the shadow is not merely psychic suppression but a disruption of all living resonances, a frequency of the hive mind that interferes with both the warp and the material. Others whisper darker things, that even the machine spirits are not immune, that the hive mind exerts dominion not only over flesh but over function itself, a mastery that is neither divine nor technological but something else entirely. These whispers are heretical, of course, and are swiftly purged from archives. But in the forges of Mars, there are rumors of tech priests who woke screaming in the night, their implants humming with phantom signals. Even the Xenos are not free from its weight. The Eldar, masters of the warp's subtlety, feel the shadow like knives across their souls. Their seers describe it as a cancer in the Imperium, spreading, blotting out pathways of sight. Some say it is the only fear they cannot fully master, for it is not simply hostile, it is antithetical to their very being. The Orcs, by contrast, respond in their brutish way, roaring louder, fighting harder, as though noise itself might drive back the silence. Yet even they fall prey. Their energies dimming, their unity cracking, for the shadow does not discriminate. It eats at will itself. What, then, is the shadow truly? The Ordo Xenos has debated for centuries. Some claim it is the psychic pressure of the hive mind, an unintended consequence of its vastness spilling over into the warp. Others argue it is intentional, a weapon deployed with precision to paralyze prey before consumption. And there are darker theories still, that it is neither byproduct nor strategy, but the hive mind's natural state, that its very existence is a negation of all others, and that what mortals call the shadow is simply the universe recoiling at the presence of a mind that eclipses all minds. To those who suffer beneath it, the question of definition matters little. They only know the dread, the weight, the certainty that they are prey. In the final days before a Tyranid swarm descends, the shadow becomes so thick that even dreams are colonized. Men dream of teeth, of oceans of flesh, of skies dripping with ichor. Women wake screaming, clutching their children, unable to explain why. Commanders give orders, but their words fall into a haze of disbelief, as though their subordinates cannot believe survival is possible. And always, the horizon grows darker, not with storm, not with night, but with the quiet suffocation of a mind that stretches across the void. When the swarm finally arrives, the shadow reaches its peak. Vox units melt into static. Psychers die in droves. The warp itself feels inaccessible. It is not merely the beginning of the end. It is the certainty of it. And as the first spores fall from the sky, as the first screeches echo across the plains, the soldiers know they are already defeated, because the shadow made them believe it before the first claw struck home. Yet there is something crueler still. The shadow does not always fade when the swarm departs. On Huskworlds, investigators sometimes report lingering echosphene static in Voxcaster's psychers who feel muffled, atmospheres heavy with malaise. It is as though the hive mind leaves behind an afterimage of its presence, a scar in both warp and matter. These echoes serve as warnings, perhaps, or perhaps they are deliberate traps. Psychic embers waiting to ignite when the swarm hungers again. To walk among them is to remember that the hive mind is not gone. It is only elsewhere, and it will return. Thus the shadow in the warp is not merely a herald of consumption. It is a philosophy of annihilation. It demonstrates to all who feel it that resistance is futile not because of claws or fangs, but because the will to resist is devoured before the flesh. It is terror, perfected not loud, not chaotic, but suffocating. It is the quiet certainty of being outnumbered not by millions, but by infinity. And when the shadow falls, the galaxy holds its breath, for all know what follows. When a world is consumed by the Tyranids, its flesh is not the only thing taken. Stone crumbles, oceans boil away, skies are stripped of atmosphere, and all that once lived is rendered into nutrient slurry. Yet the greatest theft is not of matter, but of memory. A world eaten is a world erased. Its culture, its art, its prayers, its stories, all of it vanishes as thoroughly as its mountains and rivers. The galaxy is not merely diminished in substance, it is diminished in meaning. Imagine a hive world that has stood for 10,000 years. Its spires have been blackened by industry, its manufactorums fed wars across countless sectors. Billions of voices rise in praise of the Emperor each dawn, filling the air with hymns older than any living soul. Statues of saints stand watch over plazas, their features worn by centuries of devotion. Beneath the surface, in the depths of Habla, families pass down stories of ancestors who fought at Ulanor, at Armageddon, at Cadia. These stories, spoken quietly over race, remind the people who they are. Fragments of a vast but continuous history stretching back to the age of apostasy, even the Great Crusade. And then the shadow falls. When the swarm arrives, lasguns blaze and artillery roars. But there is no battle of preservation. The people know, even before the claws reach them, that their world is already dying. They may fight for time, for the illusion of choice. But the hive mind devours not only the body, but the memory that body carried. Statues are trampled beneath chitinous feet. Cathedrals collapse, their bells ringing only once more before being silenced forever. Vox archives are melted down in bioacid, their data lost. The very air chokes with spores, as if rewriting the atmosphere into something alien. What remains when the Tyranids are finished is not ruin in the way war leaves ruins. War scatters rubble, yes, but rubble tells a story. A shattered statue still suggests what once stood. A burned book still holds scraps of words. Even bones may whisper of how one lived and how one died. Tyranid ruin is not ruin at all. It is blankness. Worlds consumed are left barren, devoid of anything that might testify to what was before. No fossil, no relic, no memory. Only ash and dust and silence. It is as if the planet itself is excised from the galaxy's memory. An amputation of both matter and history. The Ordo Xenos archives contain accounts from survivors evacuated in the final hours. A scholar of Tarsus Ultra described the despair not of destruction but of erasure. It is not that they kill us, he wrote in his final Vox transmission. It is that they make it so we were never here. Those words echo a truth the Imperium struggles to face. The loss of a world is not only military or economic, it is existential. It is as if the very soul of the Imperium is chipped away each time the hive mind feeds. And so the Ministorum wages a war of memory even as the Guard fights a war of flesh. Ecclesiarchal priests gather relics before evacuation, rushing to preserve saintly bones or blessed texts, carrying them aboard fleeing ships. But these gestures are small against the scale of loss. For every chalice saved, 1,000 others are consumed. For every scroll preserved, entire libraries vanish. The Ministorum insists that the Emperor remembers all, that nothing of faith is ever lost to him. But to the common believer who sees his ancestors' graves reduced to slurry, it feels otherwise. Faith is tested not only in the presence of evil but in the absence of remembrance. Inquisitors, too, wrestle with the philosophical weight of memory's ruin. The Ordo Xenos is charged not only with understanding the enemy but with preserving knowledge. Yet how does one catalogue what is gone? How does one archive what no longer has witness? Some among their number speak bitterly of the hive mind as a second obliterator, a force that not only feeds but also silences. They compare it to the heretical practices of the Dark Mechanicum, where data is deliberately corrupted and truth buried. But the Tyranids are not malicious in this. Their erasure is not spite, it is function. To them, memory is waste. Only matter matters. Still, there are those who resist the erasure. In the refugee fleets that stagger away from doomed planets, survivors cling to fragments. A woman who smuggled a shard of her hive's stained glass across the stars. A guardsman who tattooed the names of his regiments fallen into his skin, lest they be forgotten. A child who carried a single toy, the last remnant of a world swallowed whole. These acts are small, almost pathetic against the enormity of consumption, and yet, in their smallness, they become acts of defiance. To remember is to resist. To tell the story, even if only to oneself, is to deny the hive mind complete victory. But memory has weight, and weight can break. Many who survive do not speak of what they lost. They retreat into silence, unable to describe what it felt like to see the oceans boiled away, or the skies darkened by wings. Their silence itself becomes another form of erasure, a wound carried into the next generation. For their children grow up not knowing the songs their parents once sang, not seeing the statues their ancestors prayed before. They inherit only silence, and in silence, the hive mind's victory extends beyond the battlefield. The Mechanicus takes a colder view. To them, the destruction of a forge world is not only tragedy but inefficiency. Lost STCs, lost manufactorums, lost data vaults. These are not mere cultural wounds but technical disasters. Some within the cult Mechanicus whisper that the hive mind seeks knowledge too, that in devouring it learns, assimilates, and carries fragments forward. If true, then the Tyranids do not merely erase, they consume memory to make it their own, rewriting knowledge in a language no human can read. But such speculation is dangerous, and those who voice it often disappear into sealed archives, their cogitator ports permanently silenced. There are darker tales yet. Survivors speak of Tyranid organisms mimicking what they consumed not in culture, but in grotesque parody. A gaunt shrieking in tones that resembled a hymn, a spore tower shaped uncannily like a cathedral spire. These are dismissed as hallucinations born of trauma, yet the stories persist. If the hive mind does echo what it devours, then its consumption is not erasure, but transformation, a mockery of remembrance. The galaxy fears this possibility, for to see one's heritage twisted into alien flesh is worse than to see it vanish. It is to see memory weaponized against its makers, and yet, some cling to hope even here. The tale of Macragge's defense is remembered not only as a near-apocalypse, but as survival. Though the Tyranids sought to erase Ultramar, the sons of Guilliman stood firm, and their memory endured. Statues were rebuilt, stories retold, traditions preserved. To the Imperium, this is proof that memory can resist consumption. Even if matter is devoured, meaning can survive, carried in the hearts of those who refuse to forget. But this is rare. Most worlds have no ultramarine to defend them. Most memories die where they are born. So the ruin of memory is not only a planetary death, it is a galactic diminishment. Every world consumed is another silence added to the void. The Imperium already staggers beneath the weight of amnesia. Whole centuries have been lost to record, entire campaigns erased by warp storms or deliberate censorship. The Tyranids accelerate this entropy, devouring not only the future but the past. What will remain when enough worlds are eaten? What happens when enough voices fall silent? Enough stories vanish, enough cultures are erased. Will the Imperium remember itself at all? The Ecclesiarchy answers with faith, the Emperor remembers all. The Inquisition answers with vigilance. We must record what we can. The Astra Militarum answers with sacrifice. Memory is preserved through the blood of the living. And the people, those few who survive, answer in silence, because they know that whatever they carry, it is a fragment, and fragments cannot rebuild a whole dot. Thus the ruin of memory is the quietest of the hive mind's weapons, and perhaps its most devastating. Flesh can be regrown, worlds can be armies can be but memory, once devoured, is gone forever. In that loss lies the true apocalypse, not the death of bodies, not the collapse of empires, but the erasure of meaning. And in the end, the question remains, which is worse, to die and be forgotten, or to live and know that what you loved has been devoured into silence? There are wars that end, and there are wars that only pause. The conflict with the Tyranids belongs to the latter, for even when the galaxy scrapes a victory, when fleets are burned and hive ships shattered, the sense lingers that it is not truly an end, only a stay of execution. The Tyranids are not bound to a sector nor to a war. They are endless. They are hunger given form, and the question that gnaws at the Imperium is not whether they can be defeated, but whether the future itself can survive being eaten. It is said in the libraries of Terra that history is memory preserved, a chain unbroken from the days of Old Night to the current millennium. Yet history demands continuity. It requires time to pass from one generation to the next. The Tyranids deny this. They consume not only what is, but what could be. A hive world destroyed is not simply the death of its billions. It is the annihilation of all the lives they might have lived, the stories they might have told, the inventions they might have forged. The Tyranids devour futures before they can be born. Consider a frontier agri-world, its soil black and fertile, its children already dreaming of carrying grain to hive cities across the stars. They plant seeds not only in fields but in their life's plans for marriage, for families, for pilgrimage to Terra, for service in the guard. Then the shadow falls, and those futures vanish in the time it takes a brood of gaunts to cross a field. What is left is not tragedy in the human sense. It is vacuum, an empty future, stripped bare before it could exist. The hive mind has no interest in time as mortals understand it. It does not plan centuries ahead, nor mourn what is lost. To the swarm, the future is not possibility but inevitability, the inevitability of hunger. It is this indifference that terrifies strategists of the Imperium most. Orcs rage, chaos schemes, Necrons remember, but the Tyranids are pure function. They do not pause to gloat, nor to savor. They do not leave legacies. They move forward, always forward, until nothing remains but in the halls of the Inquisition. There are whispers that the true doom is not in the destruction of worlds, but in the accumulation of consumption. Each planet devoured adds to the biomass. Each biomass feeds the hive fleets. Each hive fleet grows into something greater. If this trajectory continues, then the Tyranids of today are not their final form. They are only the beginning. The galaxy has seen hive fleets, Behemoth, Kraken, Leviathan, each more dangerous than the last. What comes after Leviathan? What grows in the abyss between galaxies, swelling on the corpses of stars yet unseen? It is not only Xeno's scholars who fear this. The Ministorum, in its sermons, has begun to recast the Tyranids not as beasts but as a form of living heresy. They are preached as the great devourers of the future, a punishment for humanity's arrogance, a test of faith so consuming that even survival might feel like damnation. Priests shout from pulpits that the Emperor demands sacrifice, not only of flesh, but of hope. Give your hope to him, they cry, for the Xenos would take it from you. Faith becomes less about salvation and more about resisting the erasure of tomorrow, and yet, faith alone cannot fill the void of strategy. The High Lords of Terra demand answers. What is to be done when the swarm grows faster than it can be cut down? Naval commanders argue for fortress worlds, choke points where the Tyranids can be slowed by firepower and attrition. The Astra Militarum insists on ever more recruits, more regiments, more worlds bled dry to feed the defense. The Adeptus Mechanicus whispers of weapons long forbidden, bioplagues and stellar-shattering ordnance. Even among the Adeptus Astartes there are doubts, for the Tyranids are not a foe one can kill in a single strike. They are an ocean, and every battle is but a wave. Some strategists cling to hope in the galaxy's divisions. The Tyranids, they argue, are slowed not only by Imperial resistance, but by their own encounters with orcs, Necrons, and even chaos. They bleed against other predators, their endless hunger turned against rivals who also resist. But this hope is thin, for every battle fought is biomass harvested, whether victory or loss. Even defeat feeds them, and so the Tyranids grow, even in failure. But perhaps the most terrible question is the one unspoken. What if the swarm is not the whole? What if what the galaxy sees are fleets, the hive ships, the endless broods are merely tendrils, exploratory feelers testing the waters of this galaxy? If so, then all the Imperium's wars against them are not wars of survival, but skirmishes before the true war begins. There are inquisitors who whisper of this in secret conclaves, that what we face is not invasion, but migration, that beyond the galactic rim lies not nothing, but more. For the future of the Imperium, this thought is poison. To accept it is to admit that no defense is enough, no wall tall enough, no sacrifice great enough. To accept it is to admit that the galaxy itself may not survive, no matter what is done. And yet, in the shadows of the Ordo Xenos, some dare to ask if this acceptance is not already truth. The future devoured is not only a physical doom, it is a spiritual one. For what does it mean for humanity to fight without future? The Astra Militarum teaches that soldiers die for tomorrow. The Astartes preach that sacrifice preserves mankind's destiny. The Ecclesiarchy promises eternal reward beyond this life. But if the Tyranids strip away not only the body but the very possibility of tomorrow, then what are soldiers dying for? What promise remains? What reward? The answer, whispered in catechisms, is that they die for the Emperor himself. That the act of resistance is meaning, regardless of outcome. That even in a galaxy devoured, faith persists. And yet, among the rank and file, this answer feels thin. It is one thing to die knowing your children will live. It is another to die knowing your children will never be born. The weight of this despair presses down like the shadow itself, suffocating, corrosive, eroding will to fight. But here lies the paradox. The very enormity of the Tyranid threat has forged new steel within the Imperium. On worlds besieged, regiments fight not only for themselves, but for the sheer defiance of it. To kill a gaunt with a bayonet is meaningless in the great sum of the swarm. Yet for the soldier, it is proof that tomorrow has not yet been eaten. To hold a wall 1 hour longer is futile in strategy, but infinite in spirit. Each act of defiance becomes its own justification, its own fragment of future wrested back from the abyss. In this paradox lies the final reflection. The Tyranids may well devour futures, consuming worlds and peoples until nothing remains. They may strip the galaxy of memory, of culture, of flesh itself, but they cannot devour meaning unless it is surrendered. As long as one guardsman lifts his lasgun, as long as one priest raises her voice in prayer, as long as one child carries the memory of a lost home into the stars, there remains a sliver of future untouched, not because it will survive, but because it insists upon being. And so the galaxy turns, haunted by the question that none can answer. What becomes of a future eaten? Does it vanish, never to be? Does it live on in the hive mind, twisted into alien purpose, or does it persist, fragile and defiant, in the hearts of those who refuse to forget? The Imperium does not know. Perhaps it will never know. Perhaps the only answer will be written in the end. When the last world falls silent, or when the swarm itself is broken upon some unimaginable revelation. Until then, the war continues, not for victory, but for the stubborn insistence that tomorrow is still worth fighting for. The Tyranids devour, humanity resists. Between the two, the galaxy teeters on the edge of absence. And the only certainty is that the hunger is not yet finished. The future is still being eaten.